This man was arrested on his wedding day and his bride was desperate. It was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. The sun was shining, guests were seated, and the bride stood at the altar with tears of joy in her eyes, waiting for her groom. Friends and family had gathered from far and wide to witness the union of two people deeply in love. The venue was beautifully decorated with white roses and soft candlelight, creating a romantic atmosphere that seemed almost too perfect. But just when it seemed like nothing could go wrong, everything came crashing down. The groom, Mark, was running a little late, which wasn't unusual for him. He had always been a bit relaxed about time, and the bride, Sarah, was used to it. But as the minutes passed and the officiant began to glance nervously at his watch, Sarah's excitement slowly turned to anxiety. Her bridesmaids whispered words of encouragement, trying to calm her nerves. "He'll be here soon," they said. "It's just wedding day jitters." Then, just as Sarah began to think the worst, a black unmarked car pulled up in front of the venue. At first, she assumed it might be a last-minute guest or perhaps even Mark himself, finally arriving in dramatic fashion. But when two men in suits and badges stepped out of the car, a chill ran through the crowd. The men walked toward the entrance with determined expressions, their eyes scanning the room. "Where is Mark Johnson?" one of the men called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. A murmur spread through the crowd as guests turned to each other in confusion. Sarah's heart began to pound. Before she could process what was happening, Mark appeared at the side entrance, dressed in his wedding suit, looking panicked and out of breath. The two men spotted him immediately and moved toward him with purpose. "Mark Johnson, you are under arrest," one of the men said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Gasps filled the room as Mark raised his hands in surrender. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she watched the love of her life being restrained and led toward the door. "What's going on?" Sarah screamed, rushing toward Mark as tears welled up in her eyes. "What is this about?" Mark's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, he looked both heartbroken and resigned. "I'm sorry," he whispered as the officers pulled him away. Sarah chased after them, her wedding dress trailing behind her as she stumbled on the steps leading outside. "No, you can't take him," she cried, grabbing Mark's arm. One of the officers, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding in front of so many guests, sighed and said, "Miss, please step back. He's being taken in for questioning." "For what?" Sarah demanded. "Fraud and embezzlement," the officer replied. "We have a warrant for his arrest." Sarah stood frozen as Mark was placed in the back of the black car. He looked back at her through the tinted glass, his face a mixture of guilt and sadness. In a matter of minutes, the car pulled away, leaving Sarah standing on the sidewalk, her perfect wedding day reduced to a chaotic nightmare. Guests began whispering among themselves, unsure whether to stay or leave. The wedding planner, looking pale and shocked, tried to gather the staff to figure out what to do next. Sarah's mother approached her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out," she said softly. But Sarah wasn't so sure. How could she have not known about Mark's secret life? Was any of it real? The love, the promises, the future they had planned together? A million questions swirled in her mind, but none of them had answers. In the days that followed, Sarah learned that Mark had been under investigation for months. His business, which seemed so successful and legitimate, on the surface, had been a front for illegal financial activity. Investigators had been gathering evidence, and the arrest had been carefully timed to ensure Mark couldn't escape the charges. Sarah was left grappling with the reality that the man she had planned to spend her life with wasn't who he claimed to be. She faced endless calls from reporters, curious neighbors, and concerned friends. Some told her to walk away, to start over. Others suggested that Mark might have been framed, that there was more to the story than met the eye. Despite the confusion and heartbreak, Sarah knew one thing: she had to find the truth. Whether Mark was guilty or innocent, she couldn't move on until she knew the full story. The man she loved had been taken away from her on what should have been the most beautiful day of their lives, and she deserved to know why. In the end, Sarah stood at a crossroads. She could let this experience break her, or she could face the truth and reclaim her life on her terms. And as painful as it was, she realized that perhaps the wedding being ruined wasn't the tragedy, it might have been the blessing that saved her from a lifetime of lies.